So just a reminder about this chart, just has your present tense, verbs, your preterite endings, the special whole stem ones that we use with those verbs that change in every box. So this will probably be good for you to have with your final exam review, which we had for several days now. So we're going to go through each line. The way that the chart was set up, do we need to move seats or are we okay? Is if a verb is regular present tense, so this is technically regular verbs here, then I put the conjugation there. If it was a stem changer, then I would have put something here, which this verb is not. So you can either leave it blank or scratch it out or whatever the case is. But hablar is a regular verb. In the present tense, you do present tense ending. In the preterite, do a preterite ending. In the imperfect, you do an imperfect ending. No big deal. Okay? And then to speak or talk. Dormirse not only was a stem changer, technically these two boxes are the same if it's a reflexive verb that ends in se, and if it's a stem changing verb, sometimes it can be both. So technically I put in both parts here. If it's just duermo, if it's just dormir, then it would just be duermo. If it's reflexive, you would just need the reflexive pronoun to go with it for it to be the reflexive verb. Now, remember that with boot or shoe verbs, there is no change for the nosotros form, which is a common mistake that we just assume that every single form changes. It does not. So, no change whatsoever for the nosotros form. That's why we call it a boot or shoe. But if you want to write down on your chart that it's also called a stem changer, that's what changes, is in the stem, the verb changes from O to UE inside the boot or shoe, depending on which verb it is. So, reflexive column I only did in the present tense. I could technically erase present tense and just put preterite and say, do this verb in the preterite. And it would still be reflexive, and it would still be preterite. All you're doing is once you do your mete, se, nos, and se, what you're left over with is a verb. And then you conjugate that verb in whatever conjugation, whatever tense you want to conjugate that in. Now, I asked you to conjugate all these in the yo form, but reminders about some of these verbs, and technically you could put it in either place, whichever works for you. But if a verb is a basement verb, it's obviously not going to be that change in the yo form. So in the yo form, it's a regular verb. But in the basement, which technically I guess we could put under irregular preterite, something weird in the preterite, it does change from O to U instead of O to UE. So it's O to UE in the present tense, and then O to U in the preterite. Here is just basements, bottom two, versus the present tense or boot or shoe. Then the imperfect, if it's not ir, ser, or ver, those are the only three irregular verbs in the whole entire tense, the whole imperfect tense. If it's not one of those three, just attach a regular ending to it, which again you have that chart from your post-test that we reviewed. Okay. Estar, remember that yo form is estoy, but then we have accents on the rest of the shoe. What I mean by that is estás, está, and están. So the bottom three conjugations all have accents on the A's, which obviously we're doing just a yo form of these just to remind you of the verb, but if you need the whole conjugation box or if you have any questions, let me know. It's not reflexive, it's not stem changer, and it's not regular preterite. So it's irregular, where estuve is in every single box, then we put those special endings that you also have, that we already went over. So all these verbs that, they're technically called stem changers too, but it's the whole entire stem that changes in every single box. And it's a regular verb in the imperfect. And then remember we have two to-bes. We have estar, which is the location, emotion, temporary, that we also use with present progressive one. And then we have ser, the other one, the other to-be verb. Okay, escribir, no big deal, regular verb. Just change your ending, changes your whole entire tense. Make sure for all your preterite Verbs, regular preterite always has an accent on the yo form, which is what I asked you to conjugate in, and in the el usted form, the singular form. And the imperfect always has an accent on those I's for all your ER-IR verbs. Okay. Sentarse. If we haven't really used sentarse, no big deal. Okay, we just look up the meaning of it. And unless I tell you that it's one of the ones that was extra weird, then we treat it like a regular verb. This happened to be one of the ones in the E to IE chart that you have, which, again, I gave you a copy of all those charts with dots and the ones to focus on for the final exam. This one is an E to IE change, so the E changes to IE inside the boot or shoe. In the present tense, in the preterite, it is just a regular verb. And in the imperfect, again, regular ending. Okay. All right, navegar, regular verb, no big deal. In the preterite, technically still gets that E with an accent for the ending, but remember, since it's a gar verb, it needs a GUE change. So your car, gar, and zar verbs all need those special changes, but only in what form? Only in the yo form. Okay. And regular verb in the imperfect. Make sure your meanings are good. Servir. It's an E to I boot or shoe. Well, no, to boot, not a shoe. Sorry. The shoe ones that we had on our charts were the verbs like tener. That was a different change in the yo form, and then inside the shoe it made the stem change. The regular preterite doesn't apply because technically there's something that changes, and in the basement it changes to SI, RV, and then your endings. So servir is regular because it's outside of the basement, but once you get in the bottom two, then you have to change E to I. And then regular verb. Traer. Traigo just for the yo form, but there's no other changes. So you don't have to worry about anything else here. No other changes. Just the yo form is traigo, has that weird extra I and then the go there. It's one of the new ones that we covered right before imperfect. Irregular preterite, that the beginning box, or every single box, gets TRAJ, and then it has those special endings, salud, with no accents. So no accents on any of these. This one was extra special because instead of IERON on the bottom box, it was just ERON. There was no change that happened. Well, on the bottom there was the extra, instead of trajeron, just trajeron. Okay. Then regular verb in the imperfect if it's not one of the three irregulars. Then reflexive, notice these two boxes are exactly the same. So me baño present tense and reflexive present. Okay. Then change your ending to make it preterite and imperfect. Saber is only irregular in the yo form, has an accent on the E for the yo form. The rest are regular conjugations. It's not reflexive, and it's, again, one of those ones that change the whole entire beginning and have these special endings. So all the ones that I kind of put this star by here, in the yo form, ends with an E with no accent, but for the rest of them, just make sure that you're okay with them. Okay. And then regular for imperfect. Querer, quiero, for the yo form, in the present tense. And then QUIS in the preterite, and your special endings, regular verb in the imperfect. To want or love. And then this seed is a true shoe verb. This is where the shoe comes in because it makes both of these changes. So not only is it an go verb, but it's also an E to I verb in the rest of the boxes. DIJ for the beginning part, then your special endings, regular verb in the imperfect. Okay, then acostarse, to go to bed, not to go to sleep. UE change in the boot. It is reflexive, so notice that it has the technically same exact conjugation here for both. And in the preterite, just change your ending. Your reflexive pronouns stay the same in every single tense. Mete, se, nos, and se. Regular verb. In the imperfect. Comenzar is an IE change in the present tense. In the preterite, it does not have the IE change. It only has the CE change. Only in the yo form. Whoa. And of course it took away my accent. I don't know why. Oh, because it spell checked it. Fun. So comencé, CE, with an accent at the end for ZAR verbs. So CAR verbs change to what? QUE. ZAR verbs change to CE, and GAR verbs change to GUE with an accent. All have an accent because the yo form always has an accent on the yo form there. Okay. All right. Pensar, stem changer, regular preterite, and regular imperfect. Okay. So the whole point of this chart was for you to see a whole bunch of different verbs in different ways. We have the same verb doing different things because every time we switch tenses, we switch the rules. Okay. Sed is irregular in every box, basically, or every tense. So soy, eres, es, somos, son for the present tense. In the preterite, fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fueron. No accents on any of those. And then the imperfect, the era, era, eras, éramos, eran. Careful, a lot of people forget the accent on id and sed. So sed has an accent on the first letter of the nosotros form. Oops. And it also has an accent on the nosotros form of id. So id and sed both share the same box. In the preterite, the fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fueron is the same for id and sed. In the imperfect, it does change. Technically, the reason why is because we use a lot of description with the verb sed, and we use that in the imperfect tense instead of in the preterite. So anyway, I didn't make up Spanish, so I'm not exactly sure if that's the why, but that seems to make sense. Lavarse is not only reflexive, so that's it in the present tense. Anything that is present tense that ends in O is the yo form for AR, ER, and IR verbs. Preterite, AR verbs, regular, and regular imperfect. Okay. Now here's where you guys always get mad because I take away for accents. What happens if I put an accent on that O? It changes the whole entire meaning of a verb. The beginning part, ESQUI, so your stem of your verb ends in an I. We're just adding an O for AR verbs. It looks like we have IO. We don't. Not that it makes a huge difference. But the same exact verb right here, if I put an accent on the O, it's I skied. It's a whole different tense, whole different meaning. In the present tense, it's I ski. So kind of a big deal when you're talking and you're using the wrong tense. It just makes it kind of harder to understand. But regular verb in the imperfect. Volver, UE change in the present tense. Regular verb in the, and keep in mind, there are no, this one is not a basement. And the reason why it's not a basement, do we remember which ones are basement verbs in the preterite?
The ones that end in IR.
Right. So it's not an IR verb, so it's not a basement verb. And so we had O to U, E to I, and I to Y. And since this one is an ER verb, it does not fall into any of those categories because only IR verbs are basement verbs. There are a few, though, that are ER verbs like leer that would have an ER change. That would be an I to Y verb. Okay. And just to remind you the difference between volver and devolver, to give back versus to come back. Okay. Ir is always followed by an A because you're either going to a place or to do something, which would be a verb. unconjugated. And same box as preterite for ir and ser, but in the imperfect it's a whole nother conjugation. Alright, almost there. Despertarse is reflexive and also a stem changer in the present tense. So notice those two boxes are exactly the same. Preterite is just a regular verb, so just do your ending, and imperfect regular verb, just add your ending with your reflexive pronouns. Okay. Leer is what I was talking about with the I to Y change on the bottom two forms. You have leyó and leyeron. You still keep your accents for all of those. Entender. In Spanish 1, we had the regular verb comprender, which was to understand or comprehend. Spanish 2, we have entender. You can kind of use them interchangeably, but entender does have an IE change where comprender would not. So in the present tense, an IE change, and in the preterite, just a regular verb. Same as imperfect. Okay, querer, regular verb in the imperfect, irregular in the preterite, with that whole stem change in every single box with the endings with no accents, and E to IE in the yo form for present tense. So it's a stem changer. Alegrarse, regular verb in every tense. You just need to make sure you put your me, te, se for your singular side, and then nos and se, because you don't have to worry about the vosotros form for that one. So regular verb. First three columns is all regular verb, just depending on what kind of verb it is. So hacer, hago, just a yo change. There's no other changes for it. And the preterite is the HIC for all the boxes except for HIZ for the singular el ello usted form. Then your endings with no accents. Imperfect, it's a regular verb. Preferir, IE change in the present. In the preterite, yo form is a regular preterite change, but in the basement, the bottom two, it's an E to I change. Regular verb for the imperfect. And then for dar, irregular yo form. The rest are regular changes, no other changes. Remember that in the preterite, that is the weird verb that it's an AR verb, but it uses ER, IR endings in the preterite, and you just take away the accents. So it would just be di, diste, dio, dimos, dieron. I just moved it over to the irregular side since there's something different about it. So that's it in the preterite. And then D is your stem for the verb. If you drop your AR, then you add your AR endings. Alright, levantarse, reflexive, so regular verb there. Conjugated, put your reflexive pronoun in every tense. And you're done. Comer, regular verb in every tense. Cerrar is an E to IE change. And in the preterite, there is no such changes, so we just do regular conjugation. And regular in the imperfect as well. Ver, we had this issue with both the present and the imperfect tense. VE is the stem. Instead of dropping your ER, you have VE and then your endings, and then VE and then your endings for imperfect and present tense. In the preterite, though, just a regular verb. Vi, viste, vio, vimos, vieron. Regular endings. Vestirse, reflexive and stem changer. So make the stem change and add your reflexive part to it. It's a regular verb in the yo form, but in the basement it does change from E to I. In the imperfect, just a regular conjugation. Take your stem, well, put your reflexive pronoun, me, and then VST is your stem. IR is your ending that you're left with, and for IR verbs, IA is your ending with an accent on the I. Right. Bailar, regular verb in every tense. Poder, a stem changer in the present. PUD for the preterite with those special endings with no accents. So yo form, don't confuse. If we put an O there, like for this one, tuvo is a singular form, not the yo form. So careful, because the yo form for the present tense always has O with it. In the irregular preterite, it does not. Okay. Asustarse. If you see a verb that we've barely even touched, unless I tell you that something has happened to it and we've worked with it, treat it like a regular verb. You should be able to take away the SE, do your reflexive pronouns, take away the AR, do your conjugation in the present, preterite, or imperfect. No big deal. Okay. Buscar, regular verb in the present tense, QUE change in the yo form for preterite, regular in the imperfect. Pedir is an E to I boot. In the preterite tense, it's a regular verb, but in the bottom two, changes E to I in the basement, bottom two. Poner, pongo. Don't confuse these two verbs. Poner and poder, one letter changes everything. When you have a verb bank, when you actually have the verb to look at, make sure that you look at that the spelling is correct. You don't leave any letters behind. Trinity, come sit over here on this back desk, please. And lastly, the verb estudiar. Yo form is regular in the present tense. In the preterite, it's also a regular verb. This is just like the verb esquiar, that if we're looking at it, the stem ends in an I, and you're just putting your regular endings. So your stem is studi, and then your endings for AR verbs in the preterite is just an O with an accent. So it looks like it's IO, which is the ending for ER and IR verbs, but it's not. It's just O. Just looks that way because the stem ends in an I. So regular verb in the imperfect, though. So if you have any questions about any of these verbs or any other ones, let me know. And then look at your sheet that I gave you with all your verbs that have dots next to them to focus on those meanings. On that paper, you also have the exact breakdown of what's on the final exam. So it kind of gives you, summarized notes, if you will, on the list of what will be covered on the exam. The only things that are not really talked about too much on this whole review that we went over is present progressive, which I have on there and up here on the screen again, that you always have to have the form of the verb estar, and it can be in any conjugation. Because we're doing present progressive instead of past progressive, then you're doing estar in the present tense. So estar in the present tense plus the verb with the ing form, which would be A and DO for AR verbs and IE and DO for ER IR verbs. And then your differences between ser and estar, which you also had on the post-test review. But if you need extra practice on any of these topics, or if you have questions on anything, you are welcome to ask, and I can always pull out some extra practice for you.